A while ago I made this video about how energy consumption is going to plummet by 2050, and in the comments loads of people told me that actually AI is going to somehow offset all of these effects. In fact, this is a take that I'm hearing from all over the place. AI is going to crash the grid, AI is going to make us miss our climate goals, AI is going to be buying up all the nuclear power plants, but what I'm not seeing is anybody building a serious model to actually arrive at any of this. So I've tried building my own model, which I'm going to present today, and what you're gonna see is that even with the most aggressive assumptions, I cannot get AI to crash my grid. Hello YouTube, I'm Michael Size, and my model starts with revenue. It has to start with revenue, and this is important because I don't know how else to say this, but like everything else, AI has got to make money. And I don't know how people keep overlooking this or hand waving it away, but it's true. In the medium and long term, the maximum expenditure of the AI industry as a whole can at most be 100% of the revenue. Otherwise, it would be losing money infinitely, which cannot be sustained in the long term. So let's make a 10-year model. A model for 2035 whereby the AI revenue reaches $150 per working age citizen per month. This is a lot of money, and it might not be obvious right now just how high this amount of money actually is, but it's a large number, and I'm choosing a large number on purpose because I want to build this as sort of an upper bound model. It's a lot of money, and we're going to assume that all of it is going to go towards raw AI compute. This means that there's no sales tax or transaction fees, and there's no wages for the programmers or the maintenance staff, and if you're paying for something like an AI-powered robo-taxi, we're not including the cost of the car or the electricity for the car, which means that we're also not including the local compute. So what we are including in this example would be the portion of the revenue that would go towards licensing the neural model from the AI company that produces it, the raw data center compute. And on top of all of this, we're assuming that AI companies make zero profit, and all of this revenue is spent on raw compute. So now that we've established this, we need to calculate how much electricity consumption this amount of money can support. And just looking at the European Union for now, we have 330 million working age citizens, and at $150 a month, that's $50 billion a month in total, or $600 billion a year, which would make this one of the biggest industries, right up there with automotive. So as I was saying, it's becoming obvious that this number is actually very large. I'm not being conservative here. Now every H100 GPU costs $40,000 at the moment, and integrating it into a data center costs another $10,000 in overhead. But just to be even more aggressive, I'm actually going to say that Nvidia is going to slash the prices of these GPUs by 60%, putting the product itself at $15,000 and the data center at $25,000 per operational H100 GPU. An H100 consumes 0.7 kilowatts of electrical power at peak, and once you include the overhead at the data center level, the power climbs up to right around 1 kilowatt, so this means 1 H100 per kilowatt of compute. So in terms of money, we're looking at $25,000 per kilowatt of compute as an upfront cost, and because these products are usually depreciated over a period of 5 years, that means a yearly hardware cost of $5,000 per kilowatt of compute capacity. But if we're talking capacity, we also have to talk capacity factors, and this is especially important for AI inference, but in general, these GPUs are not going to be running at 100% power 100% of the time, and a more realistic estimate is probably around 50% if they're serving both training and inference. So what this means is that if we're talking about average power consumption rather than installed power capacity, then we'd actually need 2 H100s per kilowatt, which would put the hardware cost at $10,000 per kilowatt of power consumption per year. As for the electricity, actually the cost is not that much. 1 kilowatt of power consumption adds up to 8,760 kilowatt hours per year, which for an industrial consumer relying heavily on renewables, it's probably only about $500 per year, bringing the total up to $10,500 per kilowatt per year. So dividing $600 billion by 10,500, we get 57 gigawatts of average power consumption, which in turn adds up to 500 terawatt hours of electrical energy per year. This is how much power and how much electricity consumption our revenue assumption can support. And in isolation, this is a pretty enormous quantity, but in perspective, at the level of the Union, it amounts to 20% extra electricity consumption in 10 years, an average of 2% growth per year. So do you see what I mean now? I mean, we've assumed that AI becomes one of the biggest industries in just 10 years, and we're not looking at any of its derivatives, just the pure compute side of AI, and we've assumed that the industry incurs no costs other than compute and electricity, and we've assumed that the industry makes no profit on this revenue, and we've assumed that hardware prices come down 60%, and we've assumed cheap electricity, and even so, we're getting 2% growth per year. Now, to be clear, if this happened, it would be ever so slightly interesting because it would be growth, which would be different from the past 16 years of stagnation, but in the grander scheme of things is just not that significant. In fact, using this scenario, let's go ahead and analyze the impact on the grid quantitatively. Is AI going to make us miss our climate goals? Well, Europe is currently in its second solar boom. The first one was driven by subsidies and eventually crumbled under its own weight, but the second one is driven by economic realities and is thus unbounded. As a result, in the most recent year, Europe has added 50 terawatt hours of annual solar generation, and if this pace holds, it alone would be enough to cover the AI demand, but obviously the pace is actually going to increase. At the same time, natural gas consumption in the Union seems to be on track to be down by 1,000 terawatt hours this year, which is surprising because prices have actually come down since the energy crisis, so it's weird that consumption is coming down at the same time as prices. But anyway, in terms of energy availability, I would go as far as to say that AI is straight up a non-issue. But energy is one thing and power is another, so is AI going to take down our national power grids? In my model, I have 57 gigawatts of average power and presumably 114 gigawatts of theoretical peak power. But we probably don't need to add 114 gigawatts of new power plants to power this. In fact, on the tightest hour of the tightest day of this year so far, the Union still had 90 gigawatts of gas power plant capacity in reserve and another 30 gigawatts of coal capacity. Not to mention the nuclear and hydro, and by 2035 all of the batteries that we're going to install. So once again, just like with energy, in terms of electrical power, I would go as far as to say that power generation is a non-issue. Now, on the list of bad takes, an honorable mention goes to the idea that allegedly we haven't built new power plants in 50 years or something, and China builds new power plants all the time, and for this reason China is going to overtake us in AI as well. And what's disappointing about this take is that I'm hearing it from energy enthusiasts who really should know better. I mean, literally just 2 or 3 years ago, the topic at hand for energy enthusiasts was about how the US and the UK were making amazing progress on climate change by replacing coal electricity with gas electricity, and obviously that switch did not happen by running existing power plants differently. New gas capacity was added in monumental quantities, and in reality new gas capacity gets added all the time anyway, not only just to displace coal but also to increase efficiency compared to the old gas power plants that are getting replaced. So once again, building new power plant capacity is a non-issue. And you might challenge my opinions with a reality check. If everything is a non-issue in my analysis, then why are AI companies scrambling so much in practice? And I do believe that there is one issue, although only relevant in the short term, and that issue is lead times. AI right now is in this weird race environment where time is critical and money is meaningless. So the problem isn't so much that you cannot get a power plant or that you cannot get an interconnection. You can get them in 6 to 24 months, but what you cannot get is all of these things overnight. So instead, people are scrambling to purchase existing capacity in places where it's currently underutilized. This is inherently a limited resource, and furthermore, this resource is even more scarce than it seems at a glance when you take into consideration the fact that communication between data centers is severely limited when compared to communication within the data center. So if you need 1 gigawatt of compute for training a particular AI model, it is not possible to build this across 2 separate 500 megawatt sites at opposite ends of the continent, let alone build them across 20, 50 megawatt sites. So again, existing underutilized locations are inherently a severely limited resource, but in the long term, building new capacity is a non-issue. So if you can make your plans in advance, then you can go to Neoen and order a solar farm, and you can go to Tesla and order megapacks for overnight storage, and you can go to Siemens and order a gas turbine generator for multi-day lows, and that's it. They have you covered. It's off-the-shelf technology with strong established global supply chains, and none of it is scarce. And this really isn't some groundbreaking analysis I'm doing here, like we know how to make electricity, okay? That shouldn't be a controversial take. And we're not talking about order of magnitude increases, we're not even talking about single digit multiple increases, we're talking about 20%. So to summarize everything, I do not believe that there's going to be a shortage of electricity. But if we're talking shortages, what I would be asking is there going to be a shortage of GPUs if the demand actually materializes to the extent that I've assumed in my model here? I mean, we're talking about 114 million H100s, which is about 23 million per year if you're replacing them every 5 years, and in my model this would be just for Europe, so that's probably like 60 million globally, and compared to the current production capacity of maybe 3 million, that's a 20-fold increase. So I'm confident that power generation can go up 20% in 10 years, but can GPU production go up 20 times in 10 years? I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I would definitely say it's the more difficult part of the equation here. Now in the future, it's obviously not going to be H100s, it's going to be a different product. But the cool thing is that my model doesn't really care about this. The new products are usually more energy efficient and therefore they are cheaper with respect to their compute power, but they are usually not cheaper with respect to their electricity consumption. So new products really only mean that you can get more compute out of the same industry revenue. So the only way this would be relevant is if you encountered a Jevons paradox scenario where more compute unlocks even more demand and thus more revenue. But as a first order effect, whatever product you have, my model holds. Now also in the future, and to some extent in the present, inference might actually move to the edge. So at a glance, this could create a scenario where the data center does only training, but the edge devices still add net new compute, and as a result, the total electricity demand increase might not be captured by my revenue model. But I don't actually think that this is how it would play out in practice, and here's why. The edge is inherently limited. Your phone is not going to get bigger or more electrically powerful, your car is not going to haul around a supercomputer, and your PC is probably always going to be in the same 200 to 300 watts peak power range. And this is something that gets lost when you talk about the data centers, because the cloud can actually be arbitrarily large. As long as it fits on the planet Earth, you can build it, but at the edge this is not the case at all. So what this means is that if the inference ever does move to the edge, that would only happen after the models were already compressed and the edge hardware was already specialized to such an extent that the power consumption at the edge does not increase. I don't think it's practically possible for one to happen without the other, and in practice we're seeing this to some extent already with various devices, including dedicated silicon that can run neural models without increasing the power consumption. So in the scenario where all the inference move to the edge, it would mean that the data centers do only training. It's physically the same thing. The only effect that this might have on the model is higher capacity factors. And at this point the number of variables is getting quite large, so I say let's put it in a spreadsheet. Variables on the left, calculations on the right, and on screen right now is my base scenario. So before I leave, let's take a quick look at a few more scenarios. Number 1. In the inference at the edge scenario, our capacity factor almost doubles, going up to 95%, so the energy consumption almost doubles as well, and nothing else changes. Number 2, the hardware scarcity scenario. GPUs remain expensive at $40,000, and in response, AI companies extend their useful lives from 5 years to 10 years, and in this scenario, energy consumption actually remains surprisingly unchanged. Number 3, the hardware glut scenario. GPUs go all the way down to $5,000, which would be an actual cost cut, not just a profit cut, and the time in service gets cut down to 3.5 years, like in the old days. This would require monumentally good execution on the part of Nvidia and TSMC, whose costs are actually going up as we speak, but even so, it would only amount to a relatively small increase in energy consumption. Number 4, the soft demand scenario. The revenue per citizen goes down to $50, and thanks to soft demand, Nvidia drops prices hard to $10,000, even without cost improvements. The energy consumption here drops severely compared to my base case. If you remember from the start of the video when I was saying that the model has to start with revenue, you can see here that revenue matters more than anything. Finally, the balls to the wall scenario. Revenue remains strong, hardware companies execute tremendously, dropping prices down to $5,000 in spite of strong demand. Data center integrators do their part as well, dropping the overhead to $5,000. The inference moved to the edge, thus increasing capacity factors, and the time in service. I mean, look, I cannot justify long time in service and cheap hardware at the same time, no matter how large the demand is. So this stays at 5 years. And finally, we've actually managed to model one scenario where electricity consumption is actually starting to become concerning. And remember that each of these scenarios are already built on a pretty crazy set of assumptions that has AI companies making zero profit, transactions incurring zero fees, services incurring zero taxes, software including zero programmer wages. Again, this is not a conservative model. However, there is still one question which could unlock a whole new class of scenarios, and I do not have the answer for it, but the question is, how on earth does the H100 cost $10,000 to manufacture? I mean, look at it, this product cost $10,000 to produce, while the consumer GPU next to it probably costs around $300. So that's almost 2 orders of magnitude difference, and I have no idea why it has to be this way. And if this ever changes, well, that would obviously blow up my model by an order of magnitude or 2. And I do not believe that we are on the path of this changing, but I also don't understand why, so this is something to keep in mind. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. I'd say this is long enough, but there is one obvious topic that I didn't get to cover here, and that is waste heat reuse. Such a system could result in lower electricity consumption in some other area of the economy, making the net increase lower, but I don't have the time to cover it today. So I might make a dedicated video in the future, and to make sure that you don't miss it, you should like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and make sure to let me know which scenario you think is most likely in the comments. I read all your comments. I try to, at least.